As an adult, when have you found it necessary to lie to your parents for the sake of your relationship? My mother is a bit of a helicopter mom, well meaning but not above lying to me in an attempt to save me from getting my feelings hurt. She initially opened my acceptance letter to college so she could get rid of it if it was a rejection. She then tried to claim they must have opened it at the border, but I called her out on it. The worst was when she called my college program coordinator to accuse them of setting me up for failure, then tried to hide it. It was a bit of a shock when I went for a meeting with the coordinator and it started with, "So, your mom called." As a result, I lie by omission to my parents whenever there is something serious going on. I handle the problem, then I tell them what happened. I can't really go to them for advice anymore because I just don't trust my mother. This is starting to be called a lawnmower parent. They want to mow down any problems for their child before they have to encounter them. Doesn't really help. Story 2. So I got a letter in the mail about some bank account I had that included funds and how much I earned in interest. My dad opened it, came up to me, and said, "Oh, I opened this letter. Just come to me for financial stuff next time." Like, seriously? He also called and emailed my program coordinator and not only did not call her doctor, but miss, but also told her she had to get me a co op because it was her job. Hint, no, it's not. It's a separate office at my college. I found out when my program coordinator told me about it. Really? The last straw for me was when I was waiting to hear back from a job and he went behind my back to talk to the supervisor who interviewed me. He called me a few days before and asked for the person's name and number, and I said, "No, do not call." He did so anyway, called me to explain he did so, and I flipped. According to the supervisor, he called and said because he's a CEO, he can tell this supervisor to hire me. He's now on a complete info diet because who in the world calls my supervisor to force him to give me a job? I'm so sick of people saying they're just trying to be helpful. No, they're being disrespectful, actually. There's no reason to open mail or call any professional contact in my life without my permission, let alone pester them. Yes, pester. I forgot my dad has gone through my phone, Facebook, and email. He's taken screenshots as well for whatever reason. That's how he found out I was intimately active. Story 3. I'm pretty open with my parents, but my grandfather passed away believing I was going to become a stepmom to a wonderful little girl and 2 crazy boys by eventually marrying a man I was crazy about, who dumped me less than a week before Grandpa passed away, at home, of prostate cancer that had spread to his liver and his lungs before it was found. Ex said we weren't spending enough time together because I'd spent the last week doing a full schedule of college classes and then commuting an hour to spend nights taking care of my grandfather at home because he refused treatment and pretty quickly reached the 24/7 care stage. I never told Grandpa because that time wasn't about me and he didn't need to be sad for me while he was suffering. At the time, though, there were a lot of emotions all scrambled together, smooshed into a little ball, and then shoved to the deepest, darkest corner of my psyche. Because the absolute last thing I wanted was to put my preemptive grief on Grandpa. We had a lot of good talks those evenings, just like we always had before. I don't regret lying to him one bit. It wouldn't have made anything better to tell him the truth and only would have added to his issues. And I don't regret any of the time I spent with him either. As an aside, emotions don't smoosh as well. They're less like clay and more like malevolent ghosts or the symbiote thing from that one Spider-Man movie. They pop out at inconvenient times. This is a temporarily effective coping strategy, but eventually you gotta take those out and deal with them or they'll deal with you. I still use the lock it away and get things done method, very helpful at work on a bad call, or when my mother is completely losing her mind because my father passed away for 6 minutes and is being flown 3 hours away and somebody needs to be able to drive. But I'm much better these days without taking it out and poking it until I deal with it instead of waiting for it to blow its way out, say, in the middle of a Thanksgiving dinner. That's horrible, but good thing her ex showed his true colors before they got married, right? Dodged a bullet with that one. Story 4. I straight up told my parents they were awful. They were well-intentioned, but seriously had like another 20 years of growing up to do before they thought about having children. I had little to no relationship with them until after becoming an adult, when I started understanding their behaviors in the context of their own lives and upbringings. Now everything is great, but goddamn my childhood was bad, lol. And they agreed they're very non-emotional people, so I literally just explained what the problem was and the possible things they could have done right. There was a lot of, "Oh, I understand now," and, "Ah, I'm sorry," and, "Yeah, I can see that." As an example, throughout middle and high school, I had literally no friends. Not only that, but I had severe anger problems too. I had so many holes in my wall that I replaced the entire drywall, windows, and door of my room not once but several times. So, as you can imagine, it's not really a surprise to them hearing, "Yeah, y'all messed up." My dad frequently said to me when I was younger, "What in the world do I do with a kid like you?" Followed by, "I know you can do better, so do better." And that was it. Their main and obvious mistakes were I needed therapy. Between ages like 13 and 18, I would interact with my parents maybe once every few weeks. My dad was always working, my mom was always gone. The only interaction I ever had was being yelled at or punished, and usually extremely inconsistently. I'd never once been asked about friends or feelings or how I felt about things. Their interest in my life was zero. This is a major problem for a kid that already has zero interaction with anyone else. For the entirety of my teen years, I had almost zero socialization, and any attempts by me to fix it were foiled by the catch-22 of having severely stunted emotional growth. For me, literally all of this would have been significantly mitigated by a single question and a little bit of time. How are you feeling? They still don't really get it, but they deliberately try to incorporate that sort of thing in their interactions with me now, and that's good enough for me. I think I said way more than I intended to talk about, but oh well. Story 5. My mother is a devout Jehovah's Witness. If you don't know, it's a very high control religion that actively encourages shunning former members. I no longer attend, but downplay my real feelings. Every year they have a memorial of Christ's passing, which is basically the only yearly observance JWs allow of any kind. Every year she invites me, and I tell her I will go. If she knew I did not attend, she would feel the need to make a decision on whether to shun her son as someone critical of their former faith. My brother and sister already shunned me over no longer being a believer. I do it for her as much as for me. While part of me thinks I shouldn't have to, my elderly mother shouldn't be faced with a decision like that, in particular one dictated by such a terrible excuse of a religion. Seriously, who actively encourages shunning your kids? It is, absolutely, a quote-unquote terrible excuse for religion. Story 6. I let my father help where he can on the race cars. I got into drag racing at a very young age, 13, now 32. It's a huge part of my life. It's how I met my soon-to-be wife, and it takes up a lot of our free time. My stepfather was the one that got me into the sport when I was a kid, and it's what we did together all the time. He passed away about 2 months ago, and it left a huge void in my life. I was lucky enough to go in on a racing operation with my in-laws to start running a car for them before he passed. We work well together, and that's working out well. We still have the car me and my stepdad ran together, but it's been on the back burner for a bit while I got the new car going, but that's about to change. Since my stepdad passed away, my father has been finally showing interest in my racing and offers to help out. He's good with cars, but mostly working on beaters and stuff like that, and has zero knowledge about my racing as far as how it's run. He finally saw me race for the first time about a week ago, but he tries to offer suggestions and a hand on working on the cars when he can. I let him do his thing, knowing that if I told him it's in no way a help, that it would crush him. Positive is I get to spend some time with my dad and what I love doing, which has never been the case before. Story 7. My mom is a lovely woman, but she can be very neurotic sometimes, and I lie to her in an attempt to keep the peace. Half my life is a lie to her and my dad. He's not a neurotic witch like my mom, but he has his own problems. I won't burden my dad with things he can't help with. Let's see. I've told my mom at least a dozen times that I'm bi. She either blatantly ignores me or blatantly insults me, although she'll deny it's an insult, either just joking with me or completely in my head. I'm the crazy one for imagining she said anything, so how could I not lie to her at all? When I used to harm myself from depression and rage, it was mostly because of the tormentors at school and my mother at home. So I sure can't tell her that. And I can't tell her about any new people I meet because she immediately wants to harm them for being a danger to her daughter. Better not tell her about Reddit. On top of being bi, my husband and I are a polyamorous couple looking for a second pair. If I told my mom, she would probably ignore those. I would be mistreated by my husband. He would be cheating on me and in danger of my mother trying to harm him. But the biggest secret I hide from my mom, just how close the apple landed by the tree. My mother taught me to lie, to cheat, steal, and get away with it. She taught me to be disrespectful, especially to men, but she would never admit these things about herself, so I keep my mouth shut and try to mind my own business. And if you're connecting with any of the stories so far, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 8. My mom and I are really close, but she never got out of the he's my baby stage, which I guess isn't all that uncommon. I'm in the Air Force and early in my career managed to get stationed really close to home, Georgia, which my mom absolutely loved. I was there for 4 years and finally decided that it was time for me to try and go see some part of the world I've never been to. I submitted paperwork that basically lists places you'd like to go, obviously without telling her. I ended up getting orders to Alaska. When I told my mom, I made it out as though it was just the nature of the military and that I was really bummed out about it. It ended up being amazing. She's barely been out of Georgia her whole life, and I flew her up 3 times to experience the last frontier. It's been 5 years, and I still haven't told her it was me that initiated the process of moving. Story 9. How poor I was for a year. I rarely had food because my roommates didn't want me eating any of their food but would steal my money for rent out of my room. I would cry myself to sleep. I was so hungry. I couldn't afford my gym anymore, so I'd sneak into the apartments down the street from me. I saw my therapist at a homeless help center, free counseling, and I ate an apple off the ground there, core and everything. I was so hungry. Even though I knew how dirty it was, I was sick for days. The food I got came from a food pantry, my boyfriend taking me out every so often to eat, and one of my friends who was well off would occasionally give me food she didn't want. My dad never knew that the one night a week I went over to his house for dinner was the only home-cooked meal I'd actually eat. He'll never know because he would have worried every day. I also will never tell him about how mistreating my roommate's boyfriend who lived with us was, and how out of control our other roommate who had a drinking problem was. Our front door was broken in, giant hole in it from them. The apartment was always in screaming matches, things being thrown, cops always being called. I would always get in between my friend and her boyfriend because I knew I could take one if it came to that, and one time it did. He was getting aggressive and I stepped in the way. I woke up to screaming and him getting arrested and her having bruises. Well, this ended up being a novel, but it's one of the things my dad will never know because it would break his heart. Story 10. Everything. They have a rather simple and frighteningly self-deprecating outlook on life. They are the kind of people who'd rather save face than doing anything that would have people talk about them. My mother once told me that she doesn't care what her coworkers say because she's a hard worker. But yet she's terrified of complete strangers at a grocery store judging her for taking utensils. When I try to show her how ridiculous that sounds, she tosses her hands up in the air and calls me a bad child, even though the things I got in life were taking advantage of opportunities in life, not running from them. My father is the Asian version of a Trump supporter who worships the government of his country and speaks highly of his country despite numerous reports of corruption from multiple international news sources. He believes that the only way up is through hard work, not cleverness. His coworkers take advantage of him simply by being slightly more manipulative than he is, and he is blind to that fact. I avoid talking to either at all because their beliefs and outlook on life is grim and downright saddening. They believe that they cannot improve themselves, and instead of educating themselves, they'd rather stagnate and work the labor-intensive jobs they have. No matter how hard I try to teach them how to do certain things to perhaps help them find better jobs, they are adamant in their ignorance no matter what anyone says to them. Story 11. I never ask anyone for money. There's a pride in that for me. I never asked for help until when I needed something when I was like 21. I asked my dad to borrow $40 until the next day when I got paid. He lectured me about money and not being responsible. This money was to get a small car part for a friend who couldn't afford it at the time, but I didn't have the extra cash that day. But I got lectured and he made me cry. He didn't mean to, but I'd never asked for help, so I'm assuming it was his first opportunity to give me life advice. He never meant to be mean. I was just soft-hearted at the time. I no longer ask for help from anyone, unless it's for my children, but that's usually asking their fathers to pitch in once in a while when needed. The other day, my dad messaged me asking if I needed any cash because he thought he saw me at a payday loans place. It wasn't me. Truth is, I have $7 in my bank account until next Friday, and my fridge is nearly empty. I said I was fine financially, and it wasn't me at the loan store. I'll never admit to needing money from anyone ever again. Story 12. You almost always need to lie about your success if you're successful and your parents as well. Depending on the culture, you'll actually owe your parents a part of your success, if that makes sense. So where I'm from, my parents have it imprinted in their minds that I owe them a giving birth fee or a royalty for putting me on this earth fee. And that being said, when I found success through working hard and taking advantage of my abilities, I was essentially due a bill from them. I am by no means a stickler with my money. If I can help, I will. Any cash register that asks for a donation, I give one. Girl Scouts, how about $150 worth of cookies? I give my employees bonuses and take them on vacations with me. and I always teach them how to be like me. I'm not at all greedy with my money, and I am more than happy to teach and or help a person in need. I even teach, for free, local kids on how to be successful in the world. On top of all that, my parents were actually very well off. Even so, they forced me to work during college, intentionally destroying my credit by taking out cards in my name and spending without paying, and taught me life lessons by returning my Christmas gifts for refunds, just so I would know how much they cost so I could appreciate what they spent on me. They also made me get a job when I was 15 and told me I needed to pay rent while I was in school. They are greedy. My father is a corporate executive with a very nice salary. However, I doubt I would have the drive that I have without them. I would most certainly not have the skills I have without them forcing me to start programming at 3 years old to compete against our Russian friends' children. I'm grateful, but also sad that our relationship has been compromised by money. Without them, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing, but without them, I'd be broke. On the flip side, if you find success and your parents have not, once you have your own family, you'll prioritize your expenses. I pray that you don't have greedy parents, because if you do, nothing will ever be enough. I have a few peers who support and are supported by their parents only to find out enough is never enough. Story 13. When I was a kid, my dad was diagnosed with a stomach ulcer and put on medication for it. He later started having issues with extreme mood swings and had a terrible temper. He didn't know what was wrong with him until he went to get his prescription refilled and his regular doctor was away. The fill-in doctor took one look at his prescription and asked why he was still taking that medication. It was being pulled from the market due to the horrible side effect of making people extremely short-tempered. There were times when he said and did some awful, hurtful things. He feels really terrible about it. I tell him that I was too young to remember any of that stuff and it's really all in the past, but I'm lying. I remember some of his behavior, and some of the really hurtful things he said to me still hurt me to this day, but I'll never tell him. It wasn't his fault, and he was a good parent once he was taken off the medication. I don't want him to feel even worse than he already does about the whole situation. Story 14. I can tell you a story about when I should have kept lying to my mother for the sake of our relationship. I've been running a photography website for years. Nobody in my family knew. But occasionally the family would do some kind of thing and I would inexplicably be unable to attend because I had a shoot scheduled for that day. It was just stressful carrying the weight of that secret. One day I stopped by my mom's and we just had a great, adult conversation about all kinds of things. I let my guard down. I thought I could share this information with her, who I truly was, and what was really making me happy at the time, and why sometimes it seemed like I was weirdly occupied even on days they knew I had off. So I told her about the site and about the work. I thought she took it well. She didn't. I basically haven't heard from my mother since that day 4 years ago. Before, our relationship was pretty typical. I was a terrible son who predictably never called, but she called about once every week or two to talk about things. I haven't received a phone call from her since. When I've seen her during family events, in particular one time, she let me know she was not cool with what I was doing. So I messed up. I thought I was doing the right thing by being honest and telling the truth, but it only pretty much destroyed her relationship with me. It's probably the biggest miscalculation I've ever made in any relationship I've ever had, so it bothers me from that extent. But she was kind of a piece of work anyway, borderline raised by narcissists, so a large part of me just kind of shrugs it off too. Still, if I could, I'd go back to that day and keep my mouth shut and keep the status quo going. Would have been better for all, I think. C'est la vie. Well, if you like these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.